We're in a really good position here at Lucy Lou. Like, coming out of the big lockdown, we are busier than we were pre-COVID. So that for us is a good sign that we're doing all the right things. Yeah, I don't know what this next year is going to bring us. Like, we'll survive and we will grow, but a lot of places won't.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. From little things, big things grow. It's a saying thrown around in Australia. It's a song by a famous Australian, and it embodies a sense of opportunity. A seed sown can spring a big crop for a new season. The inspiration for a kid in a small country town to grow and leave and make it in the big city. Jenna North is the head chef of Lucy Lou in Melbourne. Jenna, how are you going?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. You grew up in a country town, Port Lincoln, known for some incredible seafood. What was it like leaving Port Lincoln for Melbourne all those years ago?
Well, I was 18 when I left, just turned 18, and I'd never really been out of Port Lincoln other than the small country towns that surround it. So it was a big shock coming to Melbourne. I lost my luggage on the flight over, and I sat in Melbourne airport and I bawled my eyes out until the next flight arrived with my luggage.
Wow.
It was a bit daunting.
Well, you've done some amazing things since you did move to Melbourne, but let's go back to Port Lincoln. What was it like growing up as a kid, and what was food like in your family in such a renowned fishing town?
My mum had 7 kids, so for us, food was always something done in bulk, something you could make a lot of. So, like, always spaghetti bolognese or apricot chicken, things you could do in a big dish and just throw in the oven. So we really didn't have any... There was never any beautifully done, nice, extravagant meals that inspired me to a chef. Maybe it was the bulk meals that made me want to go out and create things.
Port Lincoln is renowned for some of the best seafood in Australia. What was food like in that town growing up and with the restaurants and the pubs, given the status of some of that seafood that goes abroad into some of the best restaurants?
Well, I worked in a pub when I was about 15, and I don't reckon any of our seafood was locally sourced at all. I'm pretty sure all of it came in frozen and not from Port Lincoln, but this was like 20 years ago. So things have definitely changed since then. But yeah, I know my dad used to work on a abalone boat, so we always used to get abalone fresh from him, and my stepdad worked for one of the tuna companies, so he would always bring home these massive slabs of southern bluefin tuna. I had no idea they were on the endangered species list.
When you mentioned that you worked in a pub in Port Lincoln, but tell us about the time when you first started getting interested in food.
So in grade 10, we had to do work experience, and I chose to work in the pub because they were the only company that would take me on. I was a bit slow to getting that organised. So I worked as a kitchen hand for the 2 weeks, washing dishes and making cold salads, and they were really low staff, so they put me on as so I'd finished my work experience, and I reckon through grade 11 and 12, I worked 5 nights a week in the pub washing dishes. It's a good learning experience. And then at the end of year 12, I've really had no career pathway. So for no reason, I chose to do certificate degree in commercial cookery at the local TAFE. And it went from there. So I never really wanted to be a chef. It just sort of... it's just how my life sort of worked out.
At the top of the show, you mentioned about the trip to Melbourne, the decision you made to move there, and it was, fraught with a couple of issues with luggage and things like that. Tell us about that time of your experiences of cooking and living in Port Lincoln, and then the first job that you walked into in Melbourne, how different that was.
Well, I was still working at the same pub, the Pier Hotel, which is still my favourite pub in Port Lincoln. And then my mum had a friend who lived in Melbourne, and I just decided that I was going to go live with her for a couple of weeks and try my luck over there, try and find myself a job with zero knowledge of Melbourne whatsoever. So I got on my flight, landed in Melbourne, bawled my eyes out for a couple of hours, and then got in the longest taxi ride out to the most northern suburb of Melbourne that there was, out in Mill Park. And yeah, met this lady for the first time ever. I'd never even spoken to her. And so she helped me log on to the job website, which I had no idea about because I'd never done that before either. And I got myself a job in Melbourne Central train station working for this little cafe, just doing breakfast and sandwiches and stuff like that. And I worked that for 2 years before I decided to leave. So I was an apprentice at the time.
You ended up doing some of your apprenticeship at the Hatted Balzaris on Lygon Street. Tell us about that period of time and how you got the job and what it was like in that kitchen.
Well, I applied for the job online and I went for a first interview with the head chef at the time. That was Joel Valvasori. And in the interview, he was talking about how he wanted to take the next step with the restaurant and bring it up to a hatted level. And I had zero idea about what a hat was or anything. And you couldn't Google it. I couldn't figure out what it was. And I just bullshitted my way through it. I was like, yep, cool, hats, love them. Let's do it. And so this is where my passion probably started to kick in because Joel was very passionate about his cooking and he really loved Northern Italian food. It was where his grandma was from. That was the style of food for the restaurant. And from there, I learned how to make handmade pasta. And I always thought that would be my future. I would be the best pasta maker in Melbourne. And yeah, it was a good experience, but the restaurant wasn't really run that well. So it sort of sunk after about 2 year.
Were there any dishes that you remember that sort of changed your perspective on a career in cooking from that time?
There were no real dishes, but the way that Joel was so passionate about his food really made me sort of work more on my own skills and try and create things that were nice rather than just pumping eggs out on toast.
That led to a role at Church Street Enoteca. Tell us about what it was like in that restaurant and how it changed you.
Well, Joel got me the job at Church Street Enoteca because we all packed our belongings and left Balzari because it was not going so well there for us all at the time. So he got me the job as the pasta making chef at Church Street Enoteca, and I worked under a couple of really great head chefs over the 2 years that I was there. And they gave me the freedom to be able to put my own spin on the dishes. I was able to play with different pastas, different flours, different sauces. I think one of the dishes I made there ended up being the review for the Good Food Guide for the, I forget what pasta it was actually, it was so long ago. And yeah, that was probably the best job I ever had, was working at Church Street Enoteca. It was fun. The kitchen was nice. It was the first kitchen that wasn't really tense and, you really had to work your way up there. It was just a really good environment to work in, and I hadn't done that yet. I'd never worked in a kitchen that was a good environment.
After quite a few years in Melbourne and working in some great restaurants, how different was your life becoming to Port Lincoln?
Well, I only really went back to Port Lincoln for weddings and funerals. It was just, I put all my focus into work. So I never took holidays and I never put time out for myself. So weddings and funerals was it. And there weren't many of those over the 10 years that I had been up to at this point. But when I would go back, there were little changes throughout Port Lincoln. The cafes were popping up, nice food was popping up. It was just sort of changing, and I really noticed it because I'd been gone for 2 or 3 years by the time I'd taken a trip back there.
Back in Melbourne, you took a detour from Italian food and joined the Smith to work with renowned chefs like Michael Lambie and Brad Simpson. Tell us about that period of time.
Well, after I left Church Street Enoteca, I reckon I had 10 of the shittiest jobs of my life. Just terrible. 2 months here, 1 month here. Everything was really bad for about 6 months. And then I ended up getting a job with Brad and Zach and Michael at the Smith in Paran. Their interview, I was so broken by the time I got to that interview. They would ask me questions like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I'd say, I don't know, working. So they took me on with those answers. I don't know why. And I was just a prep chef. I would come in, I think it was the start of December of the first year that they were open, and they were so busy, and I would just pick herbs and chop like fresh produce for the salad section. And I just like made my way back out of this horrible place that I was in. And yeah, they had faith in me, and I was there 2 years before they opened up Lucy Lou, and they asked me to be a part of that. And I said yes. Actually, they really didn't give me an option. It was go to Lucy's, love it, stay, or go to Lucy's, don't love it, go back to the Smith. So,
well, that period of time when you said you had about 10 different jobs and it was a really difficult and challenging moment in your life, why did you go through so many jobs, do you think?
I don't have a good answer for that. I think I was just going in to help friends out, and then those friends would leave and expect me to take the place of them. And then, like, they were obviously leaving for a reason and stitching me up. So I just sort of bounced from cafe to restaurant to a hotel at one point. I think the hotel was the worst job I ever worked at. Imagine doing breakfast, lunch and dinner 6 a.m. till midnight, pretty much 6 days a week. That was soul destroying.
The chance to work with Michael Lambie and Brad Simpson and Zach Cribbs, you got the opportunity to work at Lucy Lou Kitchen, which you are now the head chef of, but you first moved over there and worked your way up in the kitchen. How different was that restaurant given the cuisine that they're cooking and your background?
I'd never worked in Asian food before. There was a little bit of it at the Smith because they were like a global restaurant, but I'd never even gone to like Asian restaurants to eat out unless it was Chinatown. So I really didn't have any knowledge of it. But I got given this choice and I took it. And so I started going out to like nice Thai restaurants. I think Jinder Thai was really my favourite up in Richmond, and they just how bold their flavours were, and you didn't have to weigh anything out, which I really love because I'm terrible at putting time in to weigh things out to make things. I prefer to, mix a couple ingredients together, taste it, and then go from there and see how it comes out. So you really have that ability to not be able to follow recipes in Asian food. And yeah, I loved it.
Tell us about working your way up through the kitchen there, and because now you're the head chef, how did it change your career working with Lucy Lou?
So I started off as a chef de partie for the first couple of weeks, and I didn't know it at the time, but they were just sort of letting us fight amongst ourselves to be the next sous chef, or the first sous chef rather. And I reckon my first 2 weeks working at Lucy Lou, I did not pick up my knife once. I just got in there, got everyone else organised. I remember going out to Zach and laughing to him, saying I haven't even touched my knife today. And yeah, that's why I got the job of the sous chef, because I organised the whole kitchen without even knowing it. And yeah, that's what they were looking for. And so I became the sous chef, and then a couple of years later, I don't know why I've stuck around so long. It's that it is actually a really great job, and they give me so many chances to just run the kitchen myself Like I've been doing it for 5 years now, I think.
What does it take from your perspective to be a head chef of a successful restaurant?
You need to trust your team, definitely. And I don't know, don't be an asshole. I'm not sure.
Well, tell us about the food that you're cooking there and the influences, and where does a dish creation start and end for you?
We have a lot of diverse people who work with us, and they always bring in different flavours that we haven't done before. So we have a Vietnamese guy, and he loves experimenting with foods from where he's from, and he'll come in and he'll just bring us in snacks to eat, and then we'll be like, oh, that's amazing. We could probably do something like that here, and then we'll experiment and put it on as a special, see if people like it. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's a bit too weird. And yeah, it just really goes from there. It goes from hiring the right people and I don't know. I don't know.
You said you've been there 5 years now. How do you keep yourself and your team motivated on a day-to-day basis?
Every day is the same here at Lucy Lou. We pump out the same amount of food. The same dishes that people love have been on the menu from the beginning. So to stay motivated, we normally do up really, like we have a set menu which we can change whenever we want. And so we get the juniors to get involved in that and play around with dishes. And that keeps them motivated, and that keeps us senior chefs motivated to keep going with the same dishes we've been doing from the beginning. Yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty placid person. So for me, I don't require much to stick around in a job, just good bosses and letting me do my own thing.
The last year and a half has been challenging, particularly for those in Melbourne. You're currently in your 4th lockdown. How has the last year and a half changed you?
Well, lockdown was hard because we started doing takeaway and it's really soul destroying. Like I survive on like the feel of the restaurant and the customers that come in. It's not so much the food that we're making, it's how people enjoy it and the vibe of the service. And so to pack things into takeaways is just so mind-numbingly destroying. And every day was a struggle when we were doing the takeaway, and we're doing it now again, but lucky it's only for a couple of weeks. But during the big lockdown, I got a job in a factory packing pallets for Safeway, which also mind-numbing. Just put a little headset on and off you go. But it was different. It was a nice break from packing things into plastic. And we really tried hard to give as many chefs as much shifts as possible. And that was challenging. Having to call up and tell your casuals that you don't have enough money to pay them to put them on the roster this week. That was awful. Yeah, and then to do it again a couple months later.
Well, you're currently on the 4th lockdown at the moment. How different is that sort of this period of time compared to what you've experienced before?
We were ready for this lockdown. So the way the cases were coming in and what the government was saying, we run the food in the restaurant down as low as we could and just prepped up all the stuff that we can do takeaway with and rerun with that. So the changeover wasn't as bad. There was certainly not as much wastage this time around. That was a killer last time too, the amount of stuff that we had to give away or just throw in the bin because we'd already opened the packets and charities wouldn't take it at the time. So, yeah, that was pretty awful.
You mentioned that you worked at Safeway for a period of time. Did that experience at Safeway change the way you feel about cooking?
It didn't change the way I feel about cooking. It made me realise when we get deliveries and stuff that it's not the driver's fault that the delivery is wrong because I was pick packer the safe way. So, if the orders were wrong, it was my fault, not the driver's fault. But no, in terms of cooking, we certainly do a more conscious effort not to waste produce, and to, like, if we can give it away, we do give it away. And yeah, so that has come from it for sure.
What's the feeling in Melbourne and for yourself at the moment with these continual lockdowns and the impact on the industry? How are you feeling about the next year or two with your role in the restaurant and those industry professionals around you as well?
We're in a really good position here at Lucy Lou. Like, coming out of the big lockdown, we are busier than we were pre-COVID. So that for us is a good sign that we're doing all the right things. And yeah, I don't know what this next year is going to bring us. Like, we'll survive and we will grow, but a lot of places won't.
All those years ago when you had the job interview with Michael Lambie and Brad Simpson, they asked you, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And you'd come out of many different roles. How are you feeling now? Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
Oh, I still don't know. I'll probably still running the pass at Lucy Lou, to be honest. Hopefully they open up a new restaurant, and that'll be a nice change if I get to go into that. But by the way things are going, I don't reckon anyone will be opening new restaurants. So I reckon I'll still be at Lucy Lou.
Well, Jenna, I don't think that's a bad thing. It's a very, very busy restaurant. You've done incredible things with it. We've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds today to share your story. Good luck with the rest of this lockdown, and hopefully you open up again to big crowds again soon.
Yes, thank you for having me.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.